I have brought two of my favourite books along with me, which is part of the reason why you're both here. Clifford Longley has written a wonderful book, I think in 2002, was it? Yeah. Called Chosen People, which he describes as a grand theory of everything. And it's better than the kind of Stephen Hawking's grand theory because it explains our history in terms of a sense of destiny that the English and the Americans have, and that explains all sorts of things like empire and the foundation of Israel and so on. Thoroughly recommended. He's also known, of course, as a very distinguished journalist. Many of you will know him at the moment from his writings in the Tablet and from his regular broadcasts. He was also the religious affairs editor of the Times for, what, 15 years?
20 years.
20 years. Yeah. Shirley Williams, Baroness Williams of Crosby, is actually in the middle of a very important debate in the House of Lords, so we're particularly pleased to have her. She's dashed across. She will, unfortunately, have to leave at about 5 to 7, pretty promptly, to get back for the vote. So thank you for dashing out of that. And the book that I've brought of hers that I also love is called God and Caesar, Personal Reflections on Politics and Religion. It's a fantastic book. It covers huge amounts of ground also. There's a very nice bit in it where she talks about going to the newly founded Bangladesh and to a school, I don't know if you remember this, and the children were asked to draw how they imagined the foundation of their new nation. And they all drew pictures of Indira Gandhi sitting on a large cloud, creating the nation, rather like Michelangelo's God creating things. It's actually an image which I always associate with Shirley Williams herself. Sitting on a cloud, rising above so many things, and a life of incredible achievement.
I'm going to quote not one, but 3 bits of the Gospel. Matthew 5, John 12, and Luke 15. What are they all about? Well, they're all about something which is absolutely central to today's debate, because they're all about occasions when Jesus was speaking to a woman and the apostles intervened to tell him not to waste his time in one way or another. Some will remember, for example, the woman at the well who Jesus asked to give him a glass of water. And it actually says in the scriptures that the apostles were angry and asked Christ why he was talking to a woman. There's the occasion when Mary dries the feet of Christ with her own hair, and again the apostles, or rather in this case the disciples, protest that this is an absurd way to go on, and that the money should have been sold, the oil that she pours over his head should have been sold and the money used to help the poor. Incidentally, the disciple who suggested that was Judas Iscariot. And Christ responds by saying that she has a better understanding of what really matters, which is that he will only come once to the earth and will then not come again until the second coming. And therefore, it's appropriate and right that Mary should go out of her way to indicate that he is somebody very special and very unlike other human beings. And there are other cases of that kind. You remember when he said to Mary, the Mary and Martha sisters, when he said to her, "You have the better part." What was the better part? It was that Mary was giving to thinking, to meditating, to speaking very carefully, whereas Martha, like me, bustled around the place trying to do the business. Jesus Christ is quite right, but his remark, to me at least, suggests that he thinks of Mary as being, in the fullest sense, human and capable of looking into some of the deepest issues that confront humanity.
Okay, would you, if it came to the point, would you favour disestablishment?
Not particularly, no. I think there's quite a lot to be said for an established church.
Okay, could you explain what the case for establishment is?
Well, the case for establishment, I think, are 3. One, there's a very specific case for establishment if you still live in a monarchy. Because at the end of the day, what is the Queen? What does she is based on? The defender of the faith. Yeah. The faith is not just Anglicanism. In this broader sense, it's increasingly Christianity. And I think because the Queen, or any monarch of the United Kingdom, in this case, the Queen is also head of the Commonwealth, which contains thousands of Muslims and thousands of Hindus and thousands of Catholics and thousands of Jews, it's appropriate that the Queen should be the head of the established church, given that also Lambeth is the centre to which Anglicans throughout the world come. It's, if you like, a mini Vatican, without quite the particular powers and authority of the Pope. So, no, I think there's a lot to be said for an established church. I also think, personally, that there's a lot to be said for children who attend schools which are church schools, and there are, I think, 40% of primary schools in Britain are church schools, and something like 25% of secondary schools. I think that, oddly enough, played into a very high level of tolerance in this country between religions. Well, I should make it very clear that my faith is very centred on the lessons of Jesus Christ. I am not a great admirer of the institutional church or the institutional churches. I'll be very honest and say that I think they have a great deal to answer for over the last 40 or 50 years. I'll come back later, we no doubt will come back later, Clifford, to things like Vatican II, which I think was a colossal renaissance of spiritual feeling in this country. But having said that, I have to say there have also been grave, grave weaknesses in the institutional churches, including my own. So why am I this, as you say, this character caught up in causes and so on? I think almost entirely because, at least as I read the New Testament, and bits of the Old Testament, and the last parts of Job and so on, are simply staggering descriptions of the power of God in an often evil universe. But I think I would say quite directly that for me, the teachings of Christ are very clear. They're teachings about the marginalised, the poor, the rejected, the outsider. They tell you a great deal about how you should treat asylum seekers, how you should treat people who are poor, people who are wretched, people who are not particularly well educated. And I guess I'd have to say that, to use a rather corny phrase, that what to me comes across very loud and clear is that Jesus Christ is no member of the establishment. So I think two things really. One was that I was attracted to the Roman Catholic Church because it was global, or at the very least international. Yep. I didn't like the idea very much of a church being, well, I was talked about the establishment. I wasn't keen at the time at all about the idea of a national church, or let alone a nationalist church. Secondly, I was attracted to the fact that the Roman Catholic Church, as well as spreading out across the whole of the world, could speak in many, many languages, and I don't just mean literal languages, I also mean the languages of different kinds of spirituality. And I think the other thing that probably attracted me very much was that it was so difficult to be a Catholic. I like the idea, I've always liked climbing mountains rather than walking up parks. And the Roman Catholic Church constituted huge demands on the people that belonged to it. Much greater, I think it's fair to say, than most other denominations. And I suppose I felt at the age of 17 or 18 when I'd been brought up by my father, I should explain. I'm a half cradle and half convert Catholic. My parents were socialist, and therefore they thought it was inappropriate they didn't conduct infant baptism. I think if they had, it would have led to a huge row between my mother and father. But my father took me to church every Sunday, and obviously hoped I would become a Catholic, but didn't feel he could insist that when I was 1 1/4 months old, I should be forced to become a Catholic. And so that too, I think, was a major factor for me, that it was difficult, that I came to it when I was 18 and already had thoughts of my own. But essentially those two factors were one.
Well, one question that occurs to me, arising from that, is why be anything? I mean, we're surrounded by, in the society, lots and lots of people who don't feel it necessary to have a denominational allegiance, as you and I do.
Well, I think I have to go back again to lessons of Christ. I mean, the lessons of the New Testament and of what Christ said was so fundamentally went deep into everything I stood and believed for. And I suppose I'd have to say, though many people in this audience will get very cross with me for saying it, I saw democratic socialism almost a kind of extension of the Christian ethic into the political field. Very straightforwardly, gosh, you raise a huge question, I'd have to give you a huge answer, but I'll make it as short as I can.
We're all here.
We're all here.
Weighing on your every word.
Nobody's gone yet.
No.
Anyway, the answer is, I think, crucially, that the Christian churches have to take on the issue of the loss of a moral compass. Now, we have, I think, as a society, in this society, in Europe, in the United States to some extent, all of us lost our moral compass. Tragically, the church defines that time and again almost entirely in terms of sexual morality. I voted against the abortion law. I think that abortion is a very serious thing to do. I wouldn't go as far as what happened in Ireland a couple of weeks ago, but I do think there's a case for saying that if the mother's life is at risk, she should be allowed to have an abortion. But I've never seen abortion other than a huge decision for somebody to make, not just a choice, but a huge decision. When I was Education Secretary, it's sort of something about this country that you could have a practicing Roman Catholic as the Education Secretary. It's quite remarkable in many ways. Very hard to do in France, I can tell you. But what came out of that, I think very clearly and very well, was, and I argued that we should combine, and I still believe this, in fact I've said so to Mr. Gove, parenting with sex education, not split them one from the other, as if sex education was all about nothing but biology, let alone human beings. And parenting was something that was irrelevant or could be seen quite separately from sex education. It can't. They should be seen as a spectrum. You start by teaching children about biology, but you go on to bring home to them the huge consequences of sexual activity and the essential requirement of the child to be brought up for up to 20 years. I think I'm about to say 26 now, since I have quite a lot of grandchildren. But it's got to be, it's a very long spectrum. And to divorce the two, as we've done in all our schools, except some of the faith schools, between parenting and sex education, I think it's a very grave mistake. They belong together. They should be taught together. The kids should be allowed to discuss them together. And I think that will begin to change attitudes to abortion, among other things, but certainly change attitudes towards the risk of bearing children when you can't afford them.
Given that this agenda of points where you disagree with the Catholic Church's official position has been there a long time, and I suppose it's probably quite a long list. I've read your Notre Dame lectures where you enumerate some of them.
I've read your columns.
Oh, thank you.
Same
okay,
point.
well, very similar. Isn't most people would think, wouldn't they not? Well, those are jolly good reasons for ceasing to be a Roman Catholic rather than to stay in. Now, does this tell me that your faith is in fact very, very deep? Is that the right answer? That you are not prepared to give it up?
No, I'm not prepared to give it up. I don't quite know why. What I do think I would say is that, I'm very... The saint who cries out to me most loudly is St. Thomas. Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief.
Doubting Thomas, yeah.
Yes, doubting Thomas. And I think it's the modern world is a doubting world, by and large. Even for people of faith, it's a doubting world, because we're so imbued with the principles of science and evidential statements and so forth, that it's very difficult to be just an unthinking believer in acceptance of faith. Yeah. I can't do that. But I also think that doubting Thomas says it exactly right for me. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. So yes, I do believe very, very strongly in, as I've already said, the teachings of Jesus Christ. I work my way around the Trinity a bit, but when I read particularly some of the Old Testament Gospels, like, for example, or not Gospels, rather, lessons, like, for example, particularly Job, but also Isaiah,
yes.
What comes through to you is the extraordinary power of God.
Explain to us, because I could answer your question, but I could answer my own question, but tell us what it means to you.
Well, I think fundamentally what it is a structure of my life and my relationship with others, which is what's the right word for it? It's indispensable. Now,
Would you call it fuel? Is that a good word? Fuel for the soul?
Yes, I think
refreshment.
That's a perfectly good word, yeah. And when I sound so critical of the church, it's because, here we go, one more of your questions, which is Vatican II gave me a sense of what the church could be.
John Pritchard, Bishop of Oxford, so feeling highly embarrassed today.
Quite right.
Really hugely disappointed, and I just apologise to everybody, really. But the church does disappoint us and does mess up in so many ways, and Baroness Williams, you were saying that we're always disappointed by the church. I just wonder, is there an alternative? Can we avoid institutional religion? We normally say we need something to carry the faith on from one generation to another and to give it its shape and so on. But do you think we are so disappointing that we could somehow do without institutionalised religion?
Very interesting question. Let me say two things, really. First of all, now, I don't think the institutional church can be easily dispensed with. I know I've been very critical about it, but let me say the way in which I think it shouldn't be. I don't think the right thing for the churches to do, really, is to retreat from what I was saying about the loss of a moral compass. I think the right thing for it to do is to stand out and now, once again, begin to proclaim, as, for example, Wesley did in the 19th century, its moral compass. And that's why I welcome many of the things that the current Archbishop of Canterbury has bravely said about things like inequality, about poverty, about racism and so forth. I think he's been brave. But I think he probably puts his arguments across in rather more theological language appropriate to a great scholar, which he is, than the next Archbishop is likely to do. The next Archbishop, having been brought up partly in the world of business in the city, and I suspect having had something very close to a kind of moment at Jericho, is going to be able to talk to people who have lost their moral compass in a way that is much more close to their understanding than Archbishop Rowan could have done, good as he is.
Jeremy Crant, Department of Religious Studies, University of Kent. You've spoken of your perceptions of religion. I wonder whether we might turn it the other way round and to reflect a little bit about your own community of politicians, and to really raise the question of where has the conviction politics, which you have so candidly and honestly spoken about through the last decades, where has that disappeared? Has the professionalisation, the desire for social capital and prestige, meant that we've lost a desire for conviction, perhaps if there is a fear of conviction? And what happens to our moral compass when mediatisation and professionalisation take over our politics rather than the convictions which you've so wonderfully demonstrated over the last decades?
Two things really undermine what you might call conviction politics. The first of them is that the existence in this country of large blocks of media control with very powerful influence on the public, who play very, very strongly on the public spheres. Look at the Express any day of the week on the subject of immigration, and you wouldn't know that most of us ring up a Polish plumber when our bathroom goes skew with, let alone the scores and scores of East Europeans who serve in almost all our cafes and pubs, because on the whole, Brits don't much want to do that kind of work, and it's very badly paid. So there is this kind of constant row that goes on, constant moral argument, and it's much harder to meet than it used to be. And the people we haven't got round to yet, Twitter and tweet, make it harder still, because they play almost directly on what one might call the smallest minded prejudices, because they can't express anything in any length, because they don't allow it. Secondly, the other element of professionalisation of politics is quite straightforwardly that without the support of, on the one hand, the landed gentry, and on the other hand, of the trade unions, you haven't got many politicians anymore who've got their own means.
My name's Peter Stevenson. I'm a local minister in the United Reformed Church down at the Elephant and Castle. As society does demand that its voice gets heard and the individual more and more believes that it can have its choice, then when we get a debate about, say, assisted suicide, and we want to take a moral compass view on that, how, as a politician and also as a person of faith, that the two things get brought together or not?
So the media have lost a moral compass. Politicians haven't particularly. Where else? I mean, crime's down. Where else do you see the loss of moral compass? It's not. It's not across the board.
It is pretty well across the board.
You do think?
Yes. I mean, look at the professions. Law. Far too many people in the legal business find ways to bring cases. I mean, you've probably seen my face that I've cut myself. Yes, I have. I slipped up in Westminster on a manhole cover. Everybody said to me, "Are you going to sue Westminster Council?" No, I think it's absurd. I mean, I slipped up on a manhole cover, so bad luck. And I got a perfectly free NHS, so I want to go there. So I have reason to be grateful. But people are now playing the game of suing about everything, which is what happens in the United States as well. And that gives the legal profession the chance of having very well-paid jobs for what I can only describe as a fairly lousy system of law. Doctors hold on. They're probably the profession that does best and has most trust from the people. The police, deeply under suspicion. Look at West Yorkshire. Look at the arguments about the following up abuse. Children's homes. Look again. The churches, schools. Look again. In area after area after area, areas that were trusted are no longer trusted. Even the churches, even the bishops, and so on. So I have to say no. I'm afraid the moral compass has gone skew-whiff much more widely than just in banks.
We mustn't forget the euthanasia question.
Oh, I'm so sorry, yes. It's a good question. I think I probably avoided it because it's so difficult. It's so difficult, really, essentially, for a reason that we don't discuss very much, and maybe it's something that you and your programme should discuss, I think, very deeply.
We will be in our next series.
Good. But the usual argument is that it's right or wrong to allow assisted suicide. The fundamental problem is hardly ever addressed. What is the fundamental problem? The fundamental problem is that medical science is now able to keep people alive artificially for a very long period after their natural death. And doctors, to their credit, but it may be no longer a relevant thing, are of course committed to keeping you alive if they possibly can. In the United States, 29% of health expenditure, 29%, goes on the last year of life. Why? Because many modern human beings are not prepared to accept that there's such a thing as death.
Priscilla Chadwick. The issues about religious education are constantly in the news. RE excluded from Mr. Gove's EBAC. He's savagely cut the numbers for teacher training for next year. RE's under serious threat. You could argue that we should start looking at the other end of the argument and just say religious education is personal, it's not related to the wider aspects of education. We should leave it up to the faith communities to teach it, Catholics to teach Catholic education, Muslims to teach Islamic education, etc. But the tradition in this country has been that RE has always been part of the curriculum of the schools. What is your view, Baroness Williams? I'd be very interested to know whether you think it should still be part of the entitlement to education in this country.
The issue of education, and much more widely than that, is not really so much an issue about the persecution of Christians. It's an issue about scorn for and ignorance of Christians. Most of our fellow members of the public are fairly well disposed and quite kindly people, but they just see Christianity as irrelevant, really. They see Islam as a challenge. They see Judaism as a sort of slightly quaint old religion, and they see Christianity as irrelevant. So, because I think that religion is a very key part of people's lives, and it's a very key part of the world's life, I've always strongly believed that there should be religion as part of the basic curriculum in schools. Having said that, we are a sufficiently multicultural and multi-religious country now for it to be necessary, I think, to explain not just Christianity, but to say something about what are the main religious beliefs in the world. And you can't go into huge detail because there isn't time under heaven, but you can broadly explain the differences between the Abrahamic religions, that is to say those who believe in a single monotheistic God, and those who believe in many gods or no gods. And I think you need to get across some of the fundamental tenets of religion as well as the fundamental beliefs of Christianity.